Hello, my name is Brandon Kano, and today we will be talking about the joints of the body, the different types of joints, the articulations, and how each moves, and also how they function around their bodies. And there will be three types of joints that we'll be talking about. One of them is the fibrous, which has no movement, the cartilaginous, which has some movement, and synovial, which is full movement in the body. And all three types are in our bones and then located in between bones as well. First, we're going to talk about the fibrous joint. And the fibrous joint has no joint cavity and no fibrous tissue. And also its main movement, or its main thing about it, it has no movement as well. And a great example that you can use is the skull and all the sutures in the skull. And it is also made of collagen. Another example of a fibrous joint is a syndesmosis. This also helps with firmly locking bones together and also creates slight movement. And then you can find it in between the ulna and radius. You can also find another syndesmosis joint in between the tibia and the fibula, which is by the ankle. And the last fibrous joint that we have is the gomphosis. This joint helps the root of the tooth be able to be dug deep into the bony structure of your mouth, which is also the maxillary bone in your mandible, and help it keep tight. Okay, and those are the three types of fibrous joints: the sutures, the syndesmosis, and the gomphosis. And now we'll be moving on to a different type of joint. Okay, we have a cartilaginous joint, and this type of joint connects bones with cartilage, or hyaline cartilage, or fibrous cartilage. These type of joints allow more movement than the fibrous joints, but slightly less movement than the synovial joints. We have the hyaline cartilage, and this type of cartilage helps your bones move smoothly across each other on its joints. And then the locations of this in your body is in your nose, the tracheal and bronchial rings, laryngeal cartilage, costal cartilage, articular surfaces of long bones, epiphyseal growth plate, and the fetal skeleton. A great example of your hyaline cartilage are in your knees, which are the medial and lateral meniscus. This type of cartilage is helpful for a shock absorbent for the bones, as whenever it strikes on the ground or any other movement, it'll protect the bone-to-bone contact. And in another area where you can find the hyaline cartilage in your body is in the invertebral disc. This too also helps with shock absorbent and keeps the bones from colliding each other. And lastly, we have the elastic cartilage, and it is the most flexible cartilage out of the three cartilages. And where it is located is in your ear, the outside part of your ear pretty much of your body. The eustachian tubes, which is also an elastic cartilage, which just brings the sound from the outside to the inside of your ear. And then lastly, it is also in your larynx, which is also your voice box. And out of the three main types that we have left is the synovial joint. The synovial joint is a full movement and is able to move around and have the most movement out of all the three joints. And then there are 6 major types of synovial joints. We have the pivot joint, hinge joint, saddle joint, ball and socket joint, condyle joint, and the plane joint. And we're first going to talk about the pivot joint. The pivot joint only allows a certain amount of rotation and stops at a certain amount. And a good example of this is your neck, which is able to rotate and twist from left to right, and then it is also in your wrist and elbows. And now we have a hinge joint, and the hinge joint allows for one movement of one plane, and it is able to go from up down. And an easy way to remember this is a door hinge, as you're able to open a door and it only goes from one movement or one plane. And you can find this in your knee, your wrist, your elbow, and then also your ankle. And the next synovial joint is the saddle joint. And it only allows one movement in the body, in which it is in the thumb. And as you're able to pinch your thumb and pinky together, that is a saddle movement, and that is how your joint works in the thumb. Okay, first we have a gliding joint, which is also called a plane joint. It provides gliding movement along the joints, but it does not allow rotation or other movement as much. This is located in the carpals of the feet and the tarsal of the foot. Okay, now we have the condyloid joint, which is also called the ellipsoid joint. This type of joint allows forward and backwards movement and also side-to-side movement, but does not allow to do rotational movements. This helps with the movement of fingers and is located between the knuckle joints. And it is also in the metacarpal phalangeal joints and the metatarsal phalangeal joints of the fingers. Lastly, we have the ball and socket movement. This joint allows movement of all axes. This joint is located in 3 parts of your body: the hip, shoulder, and the wrist. This is also an easy joint to remember, as it is a ball and socket, since the ball is literally in a socket. And that covers all 3 basic types of joints. And for review, the fibrous joint is immovable, cartilaginous joint is semi-movable, and synovial is freely movable around the whole entire body. And then an easy way to remember of the 3 fibrous joints is the sutures are in the head, syndesmosis is held together by a ligament, and then gomphosis is pretty much your teeth and its roots. And for cartilaginous, you always want to think about it becoming a shock absorber and keeping the bones together and not hitting one another, and which could create arthritis in the long run. But just remember, it could be in your spine, your vertebral, or also in your knees, which are your meniscus, which are the easiest ones to remember. And an easier way to memorize the synovial joints, think of the pivot as your neck twisting from left to right. Hinge joint, which could be your humerus and ulna, but then also you can think about it as a door, just opening and closing in one direction. Saddle joint, which is located in your thumb, and that's the only saddle joint that you have in your body. Plane joint, you can just think of gliding or just moving across one another. Condyle, you can just think of your fingers just being able to move side to side and wagging no. And then with ball and socket, just think of your hips and shoulders and wrists that you can move in all axes. And that concludes my video for all types of joints, and I hope you have a good rest of y'all's day. Thank you.